Welcome back to Built to Ship, the podcast where we go behind the scenes with founders and product leaders, shipping real AI products into the world. I'm your host, Tyler Postal from Voker, and today I'm excited to be joined by Josh, co-founder and CEO of Veritus, a YC-backed company that is an AI agent platform for consumer lending industry. They deploy voice-first agents across origination, servicing, and collections, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot more from Josh. It's great to have you here, Josh.
Thanks, Tyler. Yeah, great to be on.
Well, why don't we start with the founding story? What was your background before Veritus? How did you have the idea? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I've been a serial founder and technology entrepreneur my whole career. I previously spent almost a decade building a contact center software company called Conversocial that was initially kind of customer service through social media, then early mobile messaging like WhatsApp, Apple Business Messaging, then started doing chatbots in the kind of first wave of chatbot automation, 7, 8 years ago. Simple rule-based kind of NLP type bots. Even wrote a book on the future of customer service in the era of AI.
Wow.
That's obviously massively out of date now because it was all pre the current wave of LLMs. But built that company up and sold it to Verint, a public software company, in 2021. Did a few things after that, but ended up basically helping out this servicer who was looking into like AI for collections and was kind of digging into how AI could be used for collections in 2024. And as I did that, I just got incredibly excited about where we were at from a technological perspective. Obviously, I'd been paying careful attention to all things AI and was feeling like AI was rapidly getting to the point where it could do real work and have real conversations and actually make real actions in the world in an effective way. But also voice AI in particular, I felt was hitting the inflection point at the end of 2024 and early 2025, where the latency was getting low enough to have normal conversations. The turn detection was getting smart enough to be able to have a flowing conversation over the phone. The voices were getting super realistic and emotive, and the pronunciation was getting better. And the combination of those things, it just felt very clear to me that the technology was now here where you could automate the vast majority of kind of rote basic conversations that were happening in a call center. And it was clear that there were a ton of really high value use cases across financial services, collections being one, but also generally in inbound servicing and outbound sales funnel and for credit products. A lot of use cases where people still wanted to do a lot over the phone in financial conversations, but also use cases that really required a lot of care from a compliance and a regulatory perspective. And yeah, it just felt very clear to me that this was a huge opportunity in terms of the value and the inflection point, but also one that I felt really required an experienced team with dedicated focus to go after it. And so all of those kind of came together and got me really excited to launch Veritus.
So you had experience in this industry before LLMs took off. I'm curious, what was the biggest challenge back then with building these kind of products? And if you had a magic wand back then, what would you have wished for? And did LLMs deliver that and then some? Or are there still places that you're like, oh, I really was hoping this would be a capability and LLM still can't do that?
Yeah, I mean, look, ultimately in those days, it just everything had to be rigid workflows. We had to define every single path, and everything that the agent could say or do had to all be predefined. And so ultimately, it's like, yes, it was nice to be able to do that in a digital asynchronous medium of messaging. But I mean, it wasn't really any more advanced than kind of IVR systems, and phone trees. And so, could you do things those days? Yes, but could it really move the needle in the way that you can today? Not really. We were trying our best to make cool experiences that were good, but ultimately, people say all kinds of things and want all kind of things, and to have an experience that isn't frustrating, you really need to be able to just have a fluid, natural conversation with an agent that understands your intent and responds appropriately. And that just wasn't possible until modern LLMs came about.
I love that mention of intents, and I want to circle back to that later. But something else I wanted to ask about was, you mentioned that one of the reasons you're excited about this business was not just the technology, but like your background and experience. And I
Yeah.
think, compliance and all those different things, like people, we try to cut through the noise a bit. Like AI is incredibly useful, but also everyone's, claiming that a single prompt makes the best agent possible, and that's all you need. It's like, no, you need, good context engineering, and then, good infrastructure if you're actually scaling your agent. But then even the boring things that are actually still important, like how do you secure the system? How do you make sure it's compliant? All of those sort of pieces all come together to make a truly best in class agent product. What are some things you think that, now everyone's building an agent. A lot of people have access to build it that wouldn't have before, and they probably don't have the experience you do in this industry or in these spaces. What's something that other people are getting wrong that don't have that experience from the pre-LLM days of, customer support and, different types of customer experience servicing?
Yeah. I mean, our experience is that building a really great voice agent specifically is incredibly hard, right? It's somewhat easier to make really good text-based agents because it's just a simpler problem. You don't need to do as much in real time. But voice has to be super fast. That means you can't use some like advanced reasoning model, right, as an LLM. And there are lots of areas where compliance could be an issue. So I think that probably the mistake I think some companies make is just trying to think they can do it themselves using a basic kind of agent builder. And again, I think you probably could do it yourself for some text-based kind of chat agents, but when it comes to voice, it's just not really possible. And you kind of alluded to this already, but I mean, the agents that we build are pretty complex. I mean, even though the experience for a customer is just speaking to one agent, behind the scenes, we're building out these kind of constellations, right? We have a full kind of multi-agent architecture where there's different agents at the front end. So like, the first time someone's speaking to one of our agents, it's an agent that their only task is to do KYC and make sure they're speaking to the right person and they can't reveal anything. And then we also split a lot of kind of public facing and kind of background agents. So you have agents that are running behind the scenes, and we try and put as much of the kind of decisioning in behind the scenes agents who can access different amounts of information and make decisions as a way of basically avoiding any risk of the agent who's actually speaking to a customer being able to reveal something that they can't. And we spend a lot of time optimizing tool calls and API calls between the background agents and the foreground agents to make sure it's really seamless and compliant. And so, the agents we build end up being very complex in code and pretty hard to just do as a kind of consumer friendly agent builder. And the reality is, for like a true enterprise grade voice agent in a regulated industry, you need that level of complexity to ensure it's both effective and compliant.
So it's not as simple as just like having one prompt that says, don't share with the user this information. It's like, no, you actually have other pieces of code and infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
You separate the agents out. They're probably essentially air gapped where, the user is not actually talking directly to this background agent. So you can still control whether or not certain information makes it into the context for the user facing agent. I think that's it's not crazy that it's going to take some, engineering work and some architecture to design a good agent system. It still is an incredible technology. It still saves us a ton of time. It still gives better experiences, but it's not as simple as like a single prompt to make an enterprise grade voice agent.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. Let's talk just briefly about like, what are the key agentic aspects or AI features of your product, maybe focusing on a bit of the stuff that people see and interact with and the stuff that they don't. Like, I assume one component's conversational voice, right? Are there other pieces, or is that mostly what the front end is?
No, there is. So, the core of the kind of obviously customer interaction ultimately is like, a voice agent they're speaking with, or an SMS agent or an email agent. And we've built a lot of functionality around not just the agents themselves, but the QA and the way that we pull structured outputs and data from those agents and how they interact with systems of record to over API to update things and take actions. And then a lot of our clients are using our agents to do outbound communication. And so we have a whole kind of outbound orchestration platform for orchestrating these outbound calls and texts and emails, and a lot of compliance functionality around that. Because especially if you're doing something like collections, there's and anything which has kind of TCPA laws, there's times of day in local states. There can be different state rules about frequency and contact. There needs to be kind of intelligent compliance rules around okay, if you make RPC, right party contact, if you establish you're actually speaking with Tyler, then depending on the type of company, you might not be able to call Tyler again for 7 days, and so you need to kind of recognize that. So there's a lot of different kind of compliance rules in the outbound that have to kind of all go together in an omnichannel way, and which have to take into account what actually happens on the calls themselves.
For all of that, is it controlled mostly through something that's agentic, or do you kind of separate out, okay, if it's rules based and it is deterministic, we're going to use code and programmatic ways to enforce that?
So yes, so the compliance engine is definitely rule based and programmatic. Today, our campaign orchestration is also pretty programmatic. One of the areas we're really excited about is using agentic technology to make very personalized campaign orchestration decisions. So, i.e., Tyler, you speak to our voice agent and you say you're going to pay, and then you don't. Well, then let's have an agent read the transcript and decide what personalized follow-up to send you the next day. And that's going to be different from, Josh, who might be in the same overall segment, but didn't say that on the call. And I think, people have been using more traditional machine learning approaches to kind of segment customers for years, but it's been very hard to apply truly personalized outreach at any kind of scale. But now with agents, we can do that. And so that's an area that we're really excited about. We've already started to build various elements of that today.
I love that. It sounds very thoughtful to decide hey, these pieces of the system make sense to be deterministic and to be handled by rules and traditional code and programmatic approaches. And then these places where there's personalization, they can leverage that context around Tyler's in this state, or it's this time of day, I'm allowed to message him. And now we can write something personalized with with LLMs. Something I wanted to ask around your architecture. I hear a lot of people talk about in voice. There's two main ways. Maybe there's probably more that I don't know about because I haven't spent that much time building voice agents. One is direct speech to speech, which has benefits of latency and things like that. But then to your point, you lose some reasoning and just model power. And so other people do speech to text to speech. Mm-hmm. What other frameworks am I missing? What are the trade-offs you guys have seen? What do you guys use with that?
Yeah, so we do break it down into its different elements, and we do, speech to text and the LLM and text to speech and turn detection. And for us, obviously compliance is absolutely essential. And there's a lot of tool calling and API calling and interaction between the foreground and background agents. And ultimately doing all of that today is only really possible by breaking it out. So there's definitely some exciting stuff with some of the speech-to-speech and kind of audio models. And we play around with some of that. But ultimately, given how much of a priority compliance is, we kind of can't take any risks. And so that's part of the reason to do that. And the other value there is that it does mean that we can absolutely always work with the most cutting edge models for each individual part of the conversation, which we also think is a great kind of value add.
Definitely. Maybe let's talk a little bit about production challenges. A lot of people now, I would say 2024 was the year of experimenting in local environments. Then in 2025, people started to get things to production and they started to learn how to actually deploy agents. And now, still not that many companies, but some are getting to a point where they're seeing scale or repeatable usage. What are things you've experienced having voice agents in production that you didn't expect, that didn't show up in local environments? Any learning?
Yeah, I mean, with any agent, with any AI agent, and again, you see this just especially with voice, it's a constant journey of iteration and improvement. You certainly can't just build it and leave it. And you can do as much testing, and we do tons of adversarial testing and spin up fake borrowers and rounds of QA, and you can do a lot of that, and it helps. But ultimately, you put it into the real world, and people are going to do weird things. They're going to say things you never expected. They're going to act in ways you didn't expect, and you just have to be constantly on top of it. And it's just a long process of really being very iterative and constantly learning and updating. And so that just has to be, that has to be part of the model, that it's a constant journey to make these agents really, really good. And you just have to factor that into your resourcing and your kind of client engagement.
Makes sense. Yeah. No matter how much, because we're giving them a tool that can answer so many questions and can do so many things, it shouldn't be a surprise to us that they're going to take it in ways we didn't expect. We're extremely curious about this sort of like problem space because we're an agent analytics product. And so we're always curious, like, what are the different ways you handle monitoring, agents in production? Observability tools? Do you talk directly to customers and ask them like how it's going? Do you subscribe to the world of evals and LLMs as a judge, or does that not work for you guys?
Look, a bit of all of the above. So we have our own QA. So we use LLMs to review the transcript. We ended up building out our own kind of lab to really get good at doing effective QA and having really effective QA prompts for all of our calls. And monitoring for compliance and various different quality aspects. And that's super important, and helps a lot. We have experimented with various tools to do kind of automated prompt improvement. Our general experience is that works pretty well for background prompts. So if we have prompts running in tool calls doing certain decisioning, where we can build pretty robust evals for the quality of the output, then that works pretty effectively. We found it doesn't really work for your kind of public facing foreground voice agents, because what makes a high quality conversational agent is still pretty hard to fully define in kind of in a kind of eval, right? It's like at some point you need a human to do it, and if you try and write a ton of evals and then have LLMs optimizing against it, you'll end up with something that is kind of doesn't work. That will it will exactly follow all the compliance rules, but will be absolutely terrible to speak to.
I love that split between there's the background tasks might work well for AI or LM based optimization, automated optimization, and then you still need human taste for the customer facing side. What do you think about how much responsibility, not from it's your job versus my job, but what works the best in terms of split between the provider of the software, so you guys, and the provider of the agents, optimizing those versus letting your clients customize and be responsible for? I've seen all sorts of paradigms. Sometimes it's we don't know what our customers like for, how the agent should respond, or, how to talk about their business. And so we give them all the tools to optimize it themselves. Or do you guys fit more in the camp of no, we're going to handle all that stuff for you. And you don't have to worry about prompting or changing, agent behavior, or configuring it.
Yeah. So we ultimately we do a pretty white glove service for our clients, where our goal is to build an agent that is amazing for them and delivers the results and the outcomes that they need. We'll spend a lot of time with our customers understanding their scripts, their business, their training, how their human agents do things today. So we'll get a really clear agent spec, and then we'll kind of work hand in hand with them. We have a shared Slack channel, weekly meetings, and we'll be constantly kind of iterating to get it right. But ultimately, we take the responsibility to actually build that agent. We're gradually building more and more aspects where they can configure and change stuff themselves. But ultimately, today and for the foreseeable future, we're still taking responsibility for the delivery of a high quality agent.
Makes sense. And before we start to wrap up, my last question would be like, what's the next thing you'd like to see out of voice model and agent capabilities? Is it something around how they talk? Is it around reasoning? Is it tool call improvement?
Yeah, I still think that there are improvements that could be made in latency, and with more. Ultimately, I think we still need more powerful models that are great at tool calling and great at instruction following and have large context windows that are also super fast to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think there's improvements that could be made there. So I think that would be the biggest improvement to come.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time, Josh. I want to put your website up on the screen. Veritus, Veritus.com. Maybe talk the audience through, who should check out Veritus? Where can they follow along? Socials? How do they get in touch?
Yeah. So generally, we work with mid to large lenders, fintechs, banks, services, collections agencies, all people around the kind of consumer lending collections industry who need to have these regulated conversations. So feel free to get in touch on the website. I generally post quite a lot on LinkedIn, so you can find me, Joshua March, on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to follow along.
Amazing. That's Veritus.com. Check it out if you're in any of these lending or service or collection agency spaces. Josh, thanks again for taking the time to chat on the pod. And it was great learning more about voice agents. Again, like I said, I don't spend that much time in the space. And so there's a lot of other challenges that text LLMs don't have to face.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to have you back on the show in the future to hear about how things are going. In the meantime, thanks everyone for tuning in. If you're building something, go ship it, and we'll see you next time.